"This world will never be the same again," he screamed, and another voice yelled at us to hurry up. The rapid footsteps on the stairs and the sound of bolts snapping shut could already be heard clearly. I cried hard back then. It didn't make sense to me that I would never see him again. After all, he had been like a father to me. Back near that damn church, he didn't abandon me, even though I was his burden. And now, he lay in the living room, leaning against the cold radiator, gripping a large kitchen knife tightly. That was the last thing I saw of him. We locked eyes. He smiled, winked at me, and peeked out the window, which the thugs outside responded to immediately by firing several rounds at the apartment. They tore through the makeshift barricade, and I could tell the bullets had no trouble piercing the thin plywood and hitting the ceiling, kicking up clouds of dust in the already dark room. I screamed at him to come with us, but he just smiled, trying to get up on his one remaining leg. No. Fedorovich grabbed me firmly under his arm and ran up the stairs with his comrade following behind. Below, I heard not only the guttural growls of terrifying creatures, but also human voices mixed with laughter and curses. Footsteps echoed in the stairwell. I tried with all my might to stay in that apartment. I clawed at the doorframe with my nails, but what could a scrawny kid like me do against the strong hands dragging me out of there? I realized then that there was no saving my friend. I understood that the amputation hadn't helped, that the black rot was consuming him from the inside, turning him into something I didn't even want to imagine. That's why he stayed, to distract those creatures and give us some time. We all knew deep down that he wasn't going to make it. Only Uncle Lyonia, carrying me up the stairs, tried to wipe away a tear from his cheek. We ran up the staircase. Over the time we had spent here, our new friend had prepared for such a scenario. In that building, no one lived except for him and us. He'd broken through walls in several apartments on the upper floors so that, in case of trouble, we could quickly escape through the neighboring stairwell. Thankfully, we made it, squeezing through the small holes in the walls, dashing from one apartment to the next until we finally reached the last one. From there, we quietly slipped out the back and exited from the other side of the building. The last thing I heard that day was the thugs laughing. After a muffled shot, they rushed into the apartment and started taking everything we had, loading it all into cars with grins on their faces. That day, I think I'll remember for the rest of my life. I cried for a long time. Cried isn't even the right word. I had a full-blown breakdown. I didn't know what to do next, and I wasn't sure about the two people with me either. After all, age catches up to you. I watched them stumble over nothing as they ran, stopping now and then to catch their breath, and I didn't know what to think. I didn't understand who these people were who suddenly showed up at our door with guns. I couldn't make sense of anything. That day, or maybe it was evening, I'd lost track of time, ended in a damp basement of another empty high-rise. We sat there quiet as mice, too scared to even cough. We rarely spoke, and when we did, it was in whispers. God forbid anyone would hear us. I overheard the old-timers talking. Ivanovich said my friend wouldn't have made it. The amputation didn't help. That much was obvious a few days later, when his skin started turning black on his chest, neck, and back. So, all that suffering was for nothing. He acted like a real man, Fedorovich muttered, wiping away another tear. Don't cry, Yurka, he added. And that was the last thing I remember from that night. I don't know when I fell asleep or what happened after. Nothing really, just wandering through the sprawling metropolis, searching for food, water, and shelter. Finding shelter was never the problem. Food and water, on the other hand, were a different story. Every corner held danger, whether it was those creatures or people, sometimes armed, sometimes just insane. We met all sorts on our journey and faced all kinds of trials, always trying to stick together and protect each other. But it didn't always go our way. Those early months in Moscow were the hardest, the most difficult time we ever had to endure over those incredibly long 10 years. 10 years of darkness, fear, and horror, when each day could have been the last. 10 years later, Moscow, once a thriving megapolis, had turned into a dead wasteland, a breeding ground for bandits, looters, and all sorts of human scum. The food chain had thinned out, hadn't it? Food had an annoying tendency to run out. We tried leaving the city several times, but it pulled us back like a vortex. Things were even worse outside the city. Dried up fields, barren land, no wildlife whatsoever. There was no food out there, nothing at all. The ecosystem had collapsed. I can't even remember the last time I saw an animal. Hunger does terrible things to a person, makes them capable of anything, even cannibalism. Sadly, it's not rare in today's capital. People had completely lost their minds. I've met all sorts of people over the years, but thankfully, I never encountered any cannibals. I heard about them from other crazy survivors. They said there weren't many, and they lived somewhere near the Shelkovskaya bus station, though they sometimes ventured closer to the center. You never know who you'll run into. There were cultists, some peaceful, others aggressive, like the ones who took my father when I was a kid. Bandits formed groups and terrorized what was left of the ordinary population, which, by the way, wasn't much. The worst qualities in people that had been kept in check by the law were now out in the open. It didn't surprise me. Humans, after all, are probably the most disgusting and cruel creatures on the planet. Ivanovich, the same friend of Uncle Leonia, told us what was really going on. He explained and even showed us that the cause of all this nightmare was some cosmic object that had crashed into our planet 10 years ago. It carried with it an alien life form. I still don't understand why they kept it a secret from ordinary people. Maybe to prevent panic? But how could there be any panic when so many people were already dead? That black goo, that thing that could appear out of nowhere, is how they live and reproduce. And people, unfortunately, are the perfect incubators for them. That's why there are fewer and fewer humans each day and more of them. As Ivanovich said, one day, there will be only one person left on the planet, but I hope I'm not alive to see it. Lately, Ivanovich had been looking really bad, and Uncle Leonia wasn't doing much better either. Time was ticking, hair turning gray, hearts growing weary. My biggest fear was losing them, the only family I had left. That's why we set up a shelter in one of the garages in the basement. Hardly anyone wandered around there at all. It was a relatively safe place. This was our last hideout. In 10 years, we had changed locations 4 times, but this garage had lasted the longest. We had a stove, beds, and enough supplies from abandoned apartments to last. Why didn't we move into an apartment? Because looters still broke into them, even though there was hardly anything left to steal. They still wandered around. I don't know, maybe they were looking for people, or maybe they'd just lost their minds. I'm not sure. I was grown up now and capable of keeping the old folks safe. For 10 whole years, I'd been the one going out for supplies. Fate must have been watching over me. To be honest, I feared people more than those monstrous creatures. Life had become routine in these conditions. People adapted just as they always do, no matter what happens. But one question still haunted me. Could it really go on like this forever? I didn't want to live my whole life in these half-ruined, empty concrete jungles. When I was younger, I didn't think about these things much. But as I got older, I started realizing that sitting around, eating expired canned food, and jumping at every little sound wasn't the life I wanted. The old folks had managed to teach me a thing or two over the years. I wasn't dumb, After all, I had been living with a real scholar. They told me about other countries, continents, customs. I learned to read, write, and count. It wasn't exactly a school curriculum, but in these times, when the new generation was largely uneducated, it was vital. As I matured, I began to wonder, what if somewhere, far away beyond Moscow, there's a place where the black goo hasn't reached, where you can take a full breath of clean, fresh air? My thoughts didn't go much further than that. Sure, the world is big, but finding such a place would be nearly impossible. Sitting in that garage by the little stove, I knew that this couldn't go on forever. That night the stars were out, a rare sight these days. The old folks sat outside, reminiscing about their youth, and I joined them, sitting down beside them. "Hey, Yegorka," Uncle Leonia said. "What were you doing?" "Nothing much," I mumbled, but Ivanovich chimed in. "You're worried about something. I can see it." "How long have we been in this garage?" Ivanovich continued. 2 years? 3? I've lost count." "Yeah, about that," I mumbled, staring up at the sky. "There's no food left around here, and I've been everywhere," Ivanovich said, his voice growing serious. "Even the locals don't come out here anymore. It's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it's quiet, but on the other, there's nothing to eat. We've been meaning to talk to you about that, Yegorka." Ivanovich sighed. "They were up to something I wasn't going to like." "We've lived our lives. You're young, strong, and smart," Uncle Leonia smiled. "We've become a burden." "Don't say that," I snapped. "What are you talking about?" "I'm not kidding, Yegor," Ivanovich cut in. "Your whole life these last few years has been nothing but looking for food and water and taking care of us old folks. This isn't the life you wanted, is it?" "You're the only family I've got. Stop with this nonsense," I said, starting to get angry. "We're saying it's time to let go of the dead weight," Ivanovich said calmly. His words sent chills down my spine. "What do you mean, dead weight? You found some booze somewhere, or what?" I tried to joke, but they weren't laughing. "No, Yegor. We're serious," Uncle Ionia said. "We want you to find something better than this garage." "There's no way I'm leaving," I protested. "Sure, we need to get out of here, but we're all going together. I remember you back in that apartment. I remember how you reacted when people you cared about were gone. Trust me, I don't want to become a burden, and God forbid something happens to you because of me or Ivanovich. I don't want you to witness another death." I tried to argue, but deep down I knew they were right. But how could I leave them? I'd grown so attached to them. How could I make it alone in this vast empty world? In that moment I felt like the little boy I used to be, scared of change, scared of losing the ones I loved. I knew it was inevitable. That night something happened that confirmed my feelings. Living in that garage, I'd had a nagging sense that we couldn't stay hidden forever. Eventually someone would find us, whether it was people or those creatures. Someone knew there were people living in these parts. The longer we stayed, the stronger that bad feeling got, and it didn't let me down. After our tense conversation, I went around the corner to take care of some business when I heard the roar of engines and saw headlights in the distance. There was a road nearby, and while cars passing by was rare, it wasn't unheard of, so I didn't think much of it at first. But when I saw a rusty car pull up to the garage and the headlights blinded me, I knew something was wrong. I dashed back inside. "Quick, everyone inside," I shouted. "Someone's coming, hurry." I helped both of them into the garage, locking the door behind us. The car stopped right outside. I could hear voices, laughter, and the sound of guns being cocked. "Looters," I whispered. A voice from outside called out, "All right, come on out, one by one. You've got 1 minute to think it over. Step outside, and maybe we'll let you live. Either way, we're coming in. You know that, right?" Time's ticking. We huddled in the far corner trying to figure out what to do. They had weapons and I could hear them clearly. They would break through the gate. They could ram it with their car if they had to. There were enough abandoned cars on Moscow streets and plenty of gas at the deserted stations. They had nothing to lose. "Let's head to the basement quick," I whispered, opening the hatch as quietly as I could. One by one, we descended. The basement wasn't easy to find, and I hoped that this time luck would be on our side. "Time's up," the voice outside said, followed by the sound of gunfire. The metal gates rattled, but as I suspected, they held up. Then I heard the unmistakable sound of a gas burner firing up. In just a few minutes, they were inside, calling for us, laughing, cracking jokes. "Where'd you go, idiots?" "Come on out," one of them yelled. "There's a basement," another one called out, and my stomach dropped. The door to the basement creaked open, and a hand holding a flashlight peeked in, followed by a dirty, grinning face. "They found us. We had to climb out." "Looks like we hit the jackpot," one of the bandits laughed. There were only 3 of them in the garage. Maybe I could have tried to fight back, but they were armed, and my desire to live outweighed my urge for heroics. "Why didn't you just open up in the first place?" one of them asked, the oldest of the group. He was doing most of the talking. "Get outside." "Move it," he barked. "Old folks first." Uncle Ionia and Ivanovich, struggling, made their way out. The bandits laughed, pushing them, and Uncle Ionia stumbled to the ground. "What the hell is wrong with you? We lived here peacefully, didn't bother anyone. Why'd you have to come here?" he yelled, unable to contain his anger. The lead bandit crouched down next to him, trying to pull him up. Uncle Ionia had been in bad health even before they showed up. "It's your fault I'm hungry," the bandit sneered, pressing the barrel of his gun to Uncle Ionia's forehead and pulling the trigger. The shot echoed, and my heart stopped for a moment. Uncle Ionia lay on the ground in a pool of his own blood. He killed him for nothing. I lost it. I lunged at the shooter with my fist, but his buddies quickly knocked me to the ground, delivering a heavy blow to my head with a boot. I heard ringing in my ears. I could hear them talking as they ransacked the garage, taking everything that could be useful and loading it into their car. Ivanovich sat next to Uncle Ionia's lifeless body the whole time, probably still in disbelief over what had happened. "This one we'll take to Shelkovsky. We might be able to trade him for something," one of the bandits said, laughing. They tied my hands, dragging me back to the car. "What about the old man?" "Leave him. He'll starve to death anyway. Let's go." No matter how hard I tried to resist, there was no getting away. After a few attempts, I gave up, resigned to my fate. We drove through the empty streets of Moscow, the bandits skillfully avoiding the black smoke, as if they knew exactly where it was. I guess people really can adapt to anything. We made it onto the MKAD, Moscow Ring Road. I knew where they were taking me and what awaited me. Once again, fate decided to smile on me, though calling it that might be a stretch. The driver was distracted talking to his buddies and didn't notice the huge black cloud right in front of us. A massive, pitch-black cloud. It was so large that it looked like the road had collapsed into the ground. "Watch out!" one of the bandits screamed. The driver slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The car plowed into the black fog, and everything outside went even darker. The next moment, something massive slammed into the car from the right, hard enough to flip it onto its side. "Gas masks now!" they shouted. They pulled masks over their faces and even put one on me, which honestly surprised me. Gas masks help against the black fog, but are useless against the things that live inside it. Sure enough, the creatures emerged from the darkness, horrific beasts I hadn't seen in a long time. Now I remembered how terrifying they were. A tall, multi-limbed monstrosity grabbed the car with all its arms, while smaller creatures began smashing the windows and pulling the bandits out one by one. Human screams mixed with the screeches of the alien life forms filled the air. The smaller creatures looked vaguely human in the fog. They didn't have multiple limbs, and I figured they must have been people once, those who had breathed in too much of the black substance. Some were even wearing the remnants of clothing. Seizing the moment, I managed to crawl out of the car and started running away, trying to escape the fog while the creatures were busy with the bandits. The cloud was enormous, and getting out wasn't easy. It was pitch black in front of me, and I could only move by memory, feeling my way through. I could hear them running around me, growling, sounds that made my blood run cold. Human screams faded away, probably because all the creatures had swarmed over to that one spot. That's probably why they didn't notice me. And eventually I saw the starry sky above me again. The cloud was behind me now, and all I could see in it was a massive, multi-limbed silhouette that suddenly turned its head in my direction and let out a scream so loud my ears rang. The fog started expanding even faster, and I, with my hands still tied, ran for my life, not looking back. I could feel the ground trembling under my feet as those things chased me. Maybe the adrenaline rush saved me, but somehow I managed to reach safety. To be honest, I didn't even realize where I'd ended up right away. After a few minutes, when I was sure the danger had passed, I took off the gas mask, which was covered in some black gunk. I found myself in a subway station, rusty turnstiles, non-functioning escalators, and the name Medvedkovo barely visible through the dust and dirt. The station was completely abandoned. It had probably been years since anyone had set foot here. It was the first time I'd ever seen the subway with my own eyes, even though it wasn't operational. That's when an idea hit me. The trains probably aren't running, but it's safer underground than up on the surface. I could walk anywhere I wanted down here as long as I had the time and energy. As I thought this over, I was busy trying to rub the ropes binding my hands against the corner of a step. I didn't even bother to ask myself the obvious question. If it's so safe underground, why aren't the survivors living here? Why do they stay up top, where death waits around every corner? That question didn't bother me at the time. I just wanted to free myself and find something to eat. I'd have to put off my journey through Moscow's tunnels for a bit and look for supplies nearby. I just hope I can find something. I was left all alone in this horrifying world, in this terrifying city, with empty pockets and an empty stomach, surrounded by countless abandoned dark buildings, long devoid of any sign of life. Honestly, I barely remember the times when everything was good, when people lived, worked, and loved, when cars were on the roads and cities shone with billions of lights. Those days are far in the past, and sadly there was no way to go back. That evening, the night I miraculously escaped being eaten at Shelkovsky Station, marked the beginning of my long and terrifying journey toward a better place. But I didn't know that at the time. I stepped out of the metro station realizing that going underground without even a basic flashlight was essentially suicide. Not to mention food or water. There wasn't a chance of finding any in those damp, dark tunnels, so I had no choice but to search for necessities in the nearby buildings. In those moments, I desperately wanted to leave the city, even though I knew things were much worse beyond its borders. Yet, a tiny shred of hope lived inside me, a hope that one day the darkness would turn to light. Without expecting much, I quietly approached a nearby building. It looked like a typical residential home with stores and pharmacies on the first floor. There was no point in going into the supermarket. My past experiences told me other people often frequented those places, and they weren't always friendly, so I carefully climbed through a broken window and ended up inside a pharmacy. The shelves, rotting with age, occasionally held expired pills and vials, but they were of little use. I got lucky, though. After rummaging around for a bit, I found a bottle of alcohol. That would definitely come in handy. It was lying at the bottom of a drawer, covered by papers in the storage room, which probably explains why no one had noticed it before. The bottle was quickly in my pocket. After checking several more drawers and shelves, I climbed back out through a window on the other side of the building and entered the courtyard. From there, I started searching the empty apartments through the entryway. I'd never been in this part of town before, and had no idea what awaited me. Unfortunately, the apartments were as bare as everything else. Floor after floor, room after room, all empty, until I felt like I couldn't keep going anymore. I was starving. I can't even remember the last time I had a proper meal, something that wasn't just disgusting, expired garbage I had to choke down to avoid collapsing. At that point, I started feeling like a lost child, abandoned to the mercy of this dark, desolate world. My thoughts drifted to Uncle Leon Ivanovich and all the people I had lost. I often remembered their words each time I left our garage for another scavenging run. They would always tell me, no matter what happens or how bad it gets, never give up. Always stand your ground, even if there's a gun to your head. Their words used to keep me going, but not this time. Maybe because I knew they were gone. There was no one left to pray for me. I was completely and utterly alone. I sat on the stairs between the 4th and 5th floors of this cursed building, listening to the horrifying sounds in the distance, inhuman noises, screams, and howls. Some were far away, others, judging by the volume, were dangerously close. That's when I forced myself to stand, leaning against the wall. The first building was a bust. I found absolutely nothing. But when I moved on to the second one, things got a little more interesting. In one apartment, I discovered a screwdriver and a bit of buckwheat, though the packaging had been chewed on by something. It didn't smell great, but in these times, you take what you can get. Luckily, I also found a half-rotted sports bag in the same apartment. I stuffed my meager finds inside and kept moving through the other apartments. Honestly, it was the same story everywhere. Empty, abandoned rooms. The only other useful things I found were a lighter that somehow still worked, a few pieces of fabric, and a couple of batteries. No idea if they were good, but I took them just in case. As for food, apart from the buckwheat, there was barely anything. In the last entryway, I managed to scavenge a few dried-up noodles, but that was it. At least I had something to eat, and that was good enough. I found a rusty coffee pot in a neighboring house, and thankfully, water wasn't hard to come by. I filled it up from a nearby river, boiled it over a fire, and that was that. Sure, sometimes it would make you sick to your stomach, but I didn't have any other options. That's what I did that night. I filled the pot with water, tossed in everything I'd found, gathered some dry twigs, and set up a small fire in a nearby basement to cook myself a meal. The food was far from fresh, so taste wasn't exactly a priority. The goal was just to fill my stomach and replenish the energy I was running out of. Thankfully, I still had the gas mask I'd taken from those bandits, so I didn't choke on the smoke in the basement, which miraculously didn't give away my position to anyone. After eating, I went up to one of the apartments. Exhaustion hit hard, and I collapsed onto an old spring mattress, hoping I'd make it through the night. Luckily, no one entered the building, neither human nor creature. The night passed peacefully, although I woke up a few times to distant screams, realizing that one or more people were probably no longer among the living. No one screams like that for nothing. Trust me, I know. The next days were spent wandering through the city in search of anything that could help me survive. I won't go into all the details, but let's just say my findings weren't much different from what I found in that first building. It was around that time that I became determined to leave the capital. There was nothing left for me here. But soon after, something happened. Something so terrifying that I'll probably never be able to tell anyone about it. But I'll take you through it step by step. To be honest, I didn't know where to go. I had no sense of direction in this city, so I just wandered wherever my eyes led me, constantly hiding from those creatures lurking in the black mist. More than once I ended up walking in circles, returning to places I'd already been. There was absolutely no food anywhere. No matter where I looked, nothing. Each step became harder and harder. I don't remember the name of the street, but it was a narrow alley between buildings leading to a wider road. As I entered the passage, I saw someone lying on the ground. They weren't moving. I pulled out the screwdriver just in case. You never know. I could have been walking into marauders or some other scum that would jump me, and that would be the end of me. I approached quietly, as silently as possible. The closer I got, the worse the smell became. When I got close enough, I realized the person lying there was dead. Actually, it was a young woman. Her throat had been slashed, and she was wearing nothing but rags that barely covered her body, even though it was freezing outside. Maybe those who did this took her clothes. She hadn't been dead long. The smell was there, but not overwhelming yet. I was about to walk past her, but then something in my mind stopped me. Dark thoughts began creeping into my head. I knew they were wrong. I knew it was inhuman, but survival instincts are a powerful thing. I knew that if I didn't eat soon, I'd die of starvation, and no one would even remember I existed. I'd been holding on to the hope of finding a place where I could feel safe. I believed that place existed, but I needed strength to reach it. The next thing I did was beyond horrible. I sharpened the screwdriver against the wall, turning it into a makeshift scalpel, and began cutting into her flesh. I separated pieces of her meat that hadn't yet begun to rot and stuffed them into my bag. I don't know what possessed me in that moment, probably sheer hunger. I'd turned into a damn animal. God, what would Uncle Iona think of me? But he always told me not to give up, and I guess this was my way of not giving up. I tried to justify it to myself as I wiped my hands on my pants. I didn't hack her up into pieces, no. I just took enough to keep from starving to death, and then I disappeared as fast as I could, like someone might catch me, but no one saw. What happened next is probably obvious. I boiled the pieces of her flesh in that same coffee pot, hiding in some remote spot. Thankfully, in Moscow, there was no shortage of those. Before I could even bring myself to take a bite, I was nearly sick just from the thought of eating human meat. To this day, I get chills remembering it. But I ate because I had nothing else, and vomiting would have been a waste of what little I had. That was the moment I realized I was a cannibal, and that label would stay with me for the rest of my life. No matter how much I tried to justify it, the thoughts wouldn't leave my head. After that disgusting act, I wandered through the streets for a long time, but eventually I moved into the damp, dark tunnels of the metro. I stumbled forward using a makeshift torch made from rags, a bit of alcohol, and human fat. Grim, I know, but it worked. I'm not sure where I ended up. The station name was too faded to read. I lit my torch only after I had already entered the tunnel. It was cold down there, really cold and damp. The smell of mold and rust was everywhere. I walked for hours. The tunnel seemed endless, and I had no idea where I was going. I regretted coming down here several times over, but at least it was quiet. The only sounds were the occasional creak of metal and the dripping of water. It seemed safe here, or so I thought. I let my guard down. But why didn't people live down here? Up above, those monsters could turn you into God knows what in a second. Why not hide underground? That question lingered in my mind, but not for long. My torch was burning out when I saw something in the distance. It looked like a train. My eyes had adjusted to the darkness so I could make it out pretty clearly. Sure enough, there was an abandoned train on the tracks. Its windows were shattered, paint chipped, and rust had taken over. It wasn't even on a station, just sitting in the middle of the tunnel. Whatever happened here must have been bad. I climbed into one of the cars. Human bones and rotting clothes confirmed my suspicions, but as I moved further down the train, I saw something else. An enormous, pulsating mass of some strange, smoking slime at the very end of the train. It seemed to be oozing through the car from the inside and outside. At first, I didn't understand what it was, but as I looked closer, I realized this thing was alive. It pulsed like a heartbeat, and from some of its holes, black smoke seeped out, slowly filling the car and settling like ash on the walls and floor. It was a grotesque and terrifying sight. But what scared me even more was that when I looked back into the tunnel, I couldn't see its end anymore, just a thick, black fog. It was as if this mass wasn't just in the train. It was blocking off the entire tunnel, forming some kind of barrier or dead end. What now? I thought to myself, pulling on my gas mask. Breathing in it was hard, the filter probably worn out, but it was better than nothing. I didn't want to turn back, but I had no other choice. Just as I was about to leave, I heard a sound behind me, a muffled moaning, like someone trying to speak with their mouth taped shut. Then came the sound of fast footsteps. The steps seemed to come from behind the mass of slime because I couldn't see anyone in the part of the tunnel where the train stood, but I could hear it clearly. I wasn't about to take any chances, so I started moving faster. The train soon disappeared from sight, but the sounds didn't go away. It felt like no matter how far I went, I could still hear them, like whoever or whatever was making them was right behind me, hiding in the darkness, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The small flame of my torch suddenly went out when a cold, damp gust of wind blew from the direction of the train, plunging me into complete darkness. Fear, sticky and suffocating, wrapped around me like that mass of slime in the train. The fear wasn't just because I might see something terrifying. I was used to that by now. The fear was from the hopelessness. Up above, at least I could hide, run away from whatever was chasing me. That had happened more than once. But down here, there was only one way to go, and considering my current state, running for long wasn't an option. And what about this wind? Where was it even coming from? I tried to light the burnt-out rags again, adding a little alcohol to get them going. For a moment, a bright light flared up, blinding me. But in that split second, I saw something, or rather, someone, standing right in front of me. Judging by the way it recoiled from the light, it was scared of it. I nearly fell back in terror myself. In the pitch-black tunnel stood something resembling a person. It still had bits of clothing hanging off it. Maybe it had once been a passenger on that abandoned train or a metro worker, but that didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that it barely looked human now. Its head was tilted backward and slightly to the side, its skin wrinkled like crumpled paper. I didn't get a good look at its face, not that I wanted to. What really caught my attention were the strange growths on its back. They looked like fleshy, droplet-shaped appendages, growing haphazardly, as if they had a life of their own. It seemed like some alien parasite had taken over this once human body. That was the only explanation that made sense. Not wasting a second, I bolted. I ran as fast as I could, gasping for air through the gas mask's filter, which was making breathing even harder. But I kept going, pushing myself to the limit. The creature wasn't far behind. Judging by the sounds, it wasn't just running after me. It was moving along the walls of the tunnel or even the ceiling. I could hear its awful moaning and wheezing all around me, freezing my blood. I'd never faced anything like this before, and I had no idea how it would end. I didn't run for as long as I'd have liked. A sharp blow to my back sent me crashing onto the tracks. The creature was on me instantly, pinning me down with its appendages and pressing its body against my gas mask, cutting off my air. Honestly, I thought I was going to die right there. This thing wasn't just mindlessly attacking me. It was smart, trying to suffocate me in a horrifyingly deliberate way, and I could imagine what it would do with my body afterward. I don't know how, but I suddenly found a second wind. I stopped struggling and went limp, pretending to be dead. For a few long moments, nothing happened. Then, after what felt like an eternity, I felt the creature's grip loosen. I didn't have much time. Taking a huge risk, I sprang back to life, kicked the creature off me, and pulled out the sharpened screwdriver from my pocket. Now, it was my turn to attack. Fueled by sheer desperation, I stabbed it over and over, hitting anything I could. Its head, its neck, those hideous appendages. My ears rang with its deafening screech, echoing through the cursed tunnel, amplified by the walls. The creature was dying, and I kept stabbing it, cutting into its flesh with all the strength I had left. In a few short seconds, it fell silent, black liquid oozing from its body, liquid that looked disturbingly like the saliva of those who had breathed in the black smoke. The creature's lifeless body collapsed onto the tracks, and I, completely drained, sat beside it, trying to comprehend what had just happened. But I didn't have time to rest. A few seconds later, more shrieks filled the tunnel, many of them this time. I guess they had realized one of their own was gone. I forced myself to my feet and ran in the direction I had come from. I ran for what felt like half a kilometer before something strange happened. In the pitch-black darkness, I suddenly saw the outline of a metro station ahead. But how? I'd passed through here before and I hadn't seen it. Even in the darkness, I should have noticed it. I couldn't understand how I had missed it the first time, but I didn't have time to think about it. The screams behind me were growing louder and closer. I climbed onto the platform and sprinted up the broken escalator, using the last of my strength. When I finally reached the top, I collapsed onto the floor. The distant sounds of screeching faded. I had escaped them. This was the first time I'd managed to kill one of those things. So they aren't immortal after all. That means I need a weapon because with the food shortage, I won't survive long just running. And I'm sure I'll face more of those situations. Many more. At a long-abandoned subway station whose name I still didn't know, I lay exhausted for several more minutes, paying no attention to the guttural sounds echoing from the dark subway tunnel. They're far away, I thought, hoping they wouldn't reach me. I had no strength left. I even tried not to move to conserve what little energy I had left because the road ahead was going to be long, although honestly at that moment I started doubting whether I'd ever get out of this cursed city. I had no idea where to go next or what to do. I didn't even know where I was. I lay there on the damp concrete trying to figure out how I hadn't noticed this station when I was walking through the tunnel. It wasn't supposed to be here. Even in pitch darkness, it would have been impossible not to notice. Maybe I took a wrong turn somewhere? That's possible. but I don't remember coming across any forks or intersections. I had been running in a straight line the whole time. Strange. Very strange. I lay there for a few more minutes until my rational mind returned to me. I need to get out of here, I thought, and stood up, slinging my bag over my shoulder. I glanced around. The station looked strange, almost as if it had been abandoned during construction. Although, who knows what really happened here. Only one thing caught my attention, a map of the subway lines. After wiping away a thick layer of dust, I at least had a vague idea of where I was. And let me tell you, after seeing the name of the station, which was on a completely different line from where I started, I was stunned. I vividly remember how I had been walking, and I definitely didn't turn off anywhere. Even Ivanich didn't mention that there were special passageways between the lines. I didn't see any. I was walking in a straight line the entire time. There was no way I could have ended up on a different line. So what does that mean? I don't get it. Are the tunnels shifting on their own or something? That's the only explanation I can think of. Anyway, I left that eerie, dark place, which was soaked in mold, inside and out. It took me about an hour to get out, but my strength isn't endless, unlike that damn escalator. As I was climbing it, I realized just how much time, energy, and nerves I had wasted on this cursed subway. I had almost lost my life in those tunnels. And for what? Just to confirm the madness happening around me? God, what kind of hell is unfolding on this miserable earth? When I finally made it outside, it was dark. Not much different from the tunnels. Luckily, my eyes had adjusted, so it didn't bother me too much. I walked through the empty, eerily quiet streets. Only the crunch of broken glass under my feet betrayed my presence. The silence was unnerving. I had grown so used to the constant screams and howls of those creatures that now this silence seemed bizarre. At least now I knew where to go to get out of the city. I didn't know how long it would take or if I'd even make it, but I had to try. Alone in this city, I wouldn't get far. At every turn, something horrible could be lurking, or worse. Some of the people who had survived here, sometimes they seemed even scarier than the worst creatures that had arrived from the far reaches of space. Soon I reached a large road filled with rusty, dented, abandoned cars. It looked like there had been a traffic jam here when disaster struck the capital. I wandered among the chaos of metal, checking the cars for anything useful. Whenever I could, I popped open trunks, hoods, or doors, but at first I found nothing of value. After about 100 meters in what seemed to be an expensive SUV, I found a sealed can of Belarusian stew. It was a bit swollen, but I threw it in my bag anyway. In the same car, in the trunk, there were scattered rusty tools. I grabbed the biggest wrench and added it to my bag. There was also a bottle with some kind of car fluid, maybe oil, maybe gasoline. I didn't know, but it might come in handy. It seemed like not many people had been here, and those who didn't check every car. I mean, there were at least a couple hundred vehicles here, if not more. It's possible there were still things to salvage, even after all this time. Realizing this gave me a little boost of energy. I started rummaging through the cars faster, but mostly I just found useless junk. In the glove compartments were phones and other gadgets, which I tossed into my increasingly heavy bag. Why I needed dead phones, I'll explain later. In another car, I found a decent machete under the driver's seat. It looked like whoever had been here before me just didn't notice it. Surprisingly, it was in good shape, along with its sheath. This find really lifted my spirits. I was so focused on the machete that I forgot where I was and what was going on around me. That would come back to bite me. The eerie silence which had been pressing on me the whole time wasn't just a coincidence. While moving from car to car, I accidentally snagged something, either wire or rope, I'm not sure. I barely kept my balance, but the silence was shattered by the clatter of cans. The sound echoed for a moment, then stopped with a loud bang. It came from what seemed to be an abandoned grocery store to my right. Suddenly, a bullet hit one of the cars near me. Realizing what was happening, I bolted. Running straight would be suicide. I understood there was a sniper in one of the windows, and I was his prey. Another shot rang out, missing, but closer this time. At that moment, I was trying to climb through a window of a building on the opposite corner of the road. That's when I heard voices from the street. "He's not alone. He's with Dan. Catch him, quick," someone shouted. "He's in that building. Didn't you see, idiot?" I managed to climb through the window just as they shouted, "Get him before he escapes." The adrenaline kicked in, and I ran as fast as I could. I leaped over entire flights of stairs in the building, finally bursting out the back. But the pursuers weren't far behind. I could hear their voices closing in. Glancing back, I saw one of them with a miner's headlamp, partially illuminating his face. He was the one with the rifle. Knowing he'd start shooting soon, I darted from tree to tree, hiding behind poles and debris. "I see him, behind that pole," they yelled in crazed voices. I kept running until, out of nowhere, some lunatic jumped at me from behind a building and clubbed me over the head with a stick. I collapsed to the ground, clutching my head. Well, looks like we caught ourselves a runner," one of them rasped. Judging by the rifle in his hands, he was the one who had been shooting at me. "We've been waiting for days, and here you are at last," the second one said, flashing a disgusting smile, revealing rotting yellow teeth. "Who are you? What do you want? Let me go," I blurted out. "You really think we chased you just to let you go?" Hearing this, I tried to break free, but one of them hit me across the face and I collapsed back to the ground. "If you try to run again, I'll fry your empty skull in oil and eat it for dinner. Got it?" He shoved the cold barrel of his rifle into my mouth, growling like an animal. I had no choice but to nod. The other two goons grabbed me by the arms and dragged me off into the unknown. Not that it mattered. Every direction was unknown to me. I kept quiet, not wanting another blow to the face while they mumbled something to each other. I couldn't make out a word. After about 10 minutes, they threw me like a sack of potatoes into the trunk of a car. They tied my hands and feet before shutting the trunk, then got in the car themselves. We started driving off to God knows where. I could occasionally hear bits of their conversation, but still couldn't make sense of it. We drove for a long time. My limbs went numb, and my head banged against something a couple of times when the driver swerved to avoid pockets of that black plague. I couldn't help but be amazed at how these people had adapted to this hell. I had no idea how they could sense anomalies beforehand, but at that moment it didn't matter. I was lying in the trunk, fully aware they weren't taking me to some healing spa. More like the infamous Shelkovsky camp, where that one with the rifle had said he'd fry my head. No, not there, anywhere but there. Thank God I never made it there before. But now my chances of survival were slim to none. Oh God, what's going to happen to me? It hit me. I'm being taken to those damned cannibals. I remembered how their hands had trembled when they were dragging me to the car. I could feel it. Yep, they're taking me to Shelkovsky. Panic started creeping in. My bound hands began to shake. We'd been driving for maybe an hour, maybe 2. I had completely lost track of time. Suddenly the car stopped. I heard the engine die and then the sound of doors opening and closing. Then the trunk flew open and a bright light blinded me. The noise was coming from a generator powering lights strung like Christmas decorations on the walls of some old, abandoned warehouse. There were several barrels with fires burning inside, making the place warm and it smelled weird, like burning wood mixed with some kind of grease. I don't know, that's just the first thing that came to mind. There were quite a few people there, too many to count. Everyone was busy with something, but a few of them caught my attention more than the others. In the corner, behind a makeshift screen that was slightly ajar, I saw a man holding a huge knife. He was standing over a large table, and lying on it was a human body, or what was left of it. The butcher expertly carved through the flesh, exposing white bones, and packed the meat into filthy containers. I almost threw up. Not that long ago, I had done something similar myself. A man walked up to me soon after. He looked like a regular guy, maybe 50 years old, with a bit of stubble and wrinkles, and hands that trembled slightly. That's the first thing I noticed. He sat down across from me and lit a cigarette, blowing the bitter smoke right in my face. "So, you fell into our trap, huh?" one of my captors said. "He sure did," the man replied, puffing on his cigarette. "Got caught in the pileup." "Yeah, in the traffic jam." "Good, I told you it would work," the man said, a sinister grin spreading across his face. "And here's our proof, alive. For now." "Where'd you come from, huh?" he asked me. "And I don't need to explain to you where you are now, do I? Just tell the truth. It might save your life." He blew another cloud of smoke directly into my face, clearly enjoying my discomfort. "Marauders killed my family. We lived in garages." "I don't remember what district it was," I stammered. "How'd you survive?" "I ran. I managed to escape." The man's gaze shifted to my bag. "Hey guys," he said to my captors, "did you search him?" "What's in the bag?" "Could be anything. What if he's got a grenade in there and pulls the pin, sending us all to the afterlife?" We didn't think to check. "Didn't think, huh? And what if he does have a grenade?" The man sneered as he took my bag off me. "Let's see, phones? Why do you need so many phones? Wait, what's this?" He pulled out that piece of human flesh I had taken and smirked. "Who the hell did you bring here?" The man growled at my captors. "I take it this is human meat, right?" He looked at me with piercing eyes. I lowered my head. "So, you're one of us, huh?" he asked, a question I knew could save my life if answered correctly. "Yes," I replied. "Well, isn't that something?" he chuckled. He pulled out a knife and cut the ropes binding my hands and feet. "Welcome to Shelkovsky," he said, slapping me on the back. "Though your supplies are pretty rotten. I wouldn't eat that if I were you." He laughed and tossed the piece of human flesh to a pack of dogs tied up nearby. "What a connoisseur you are," I thought bitterly. His tone softened once he saw what was in my bag. He put his arm around me and started talking to me like we were old pals. "So they're the ones who gave you this, huh?" he asked, noticing the wound on my head from the stick. I just nodded silently. "Well, don't blame them. How are they supposed to know? We'll take care of the wound, don't worry. We've got some supplies. Come with me, come on." We walked to an old, half-rotten door. Behind it, they had a sort of supply room, I guess you could call it. There were some shelves with things, meds, clothes, and even weapons. Supply room is probably too grand a word for it, though. Their stock was meager, but it seemed like they replenished it regularly during their raids. I had heard they didn't venture far from their district, though, which made me think they weren't doing so well either. The man grabbed some bandages and antiseptic from a box. "Here, this is all we've got. You want to bandage yourself, or should I help?" "I'll do it myself." While wrapping the bandages around my bloody hands, I couldn't stop thinking about how I was going to get out of there. I silently thanked my lucky stars that I had thrown that rotten piece of meat into my bag. Otherwise, I would have been lying on that butcher's table by now. I had to wait until they all went to sleep and then sneak out. You done yet? The man called out to me. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Nazar. He walked up to me again. So, you staying with us? I highly recommend it. We're all one big happy family here. You won't regret it. Who's that over there? I asked, noticing a figure in the dimly lit corner of the room, behind a cage I hadn't seen before. Inside the cage sat a man, dressed in rags, chained to a metal pipe. He had a dirty bowl beside him like an animal. He looked starved, and judging by his appearance, he didn't have much time left. He's been with us for a while, Nazar replied. We haven't gotten around to eating him yet. The guys keep bringing in new replacements for him. He laughed. Hey, Lucky. Yeah, I'm talking to you, he shouted at the man in the cage, banging on the bars. And you. He turned back to me. What's your name anyway? Igor, I answered. Well, Igor, make yourself at home. You must be tired. There are mattresses in the storeroom. You can pick anyone you like and settle down wherever you want. Such a friendly cannibal, I thought to myself. He was casually telling me about everything they did here like it was no big deal. We didn't talk much about the alien invaders. I was more interested in how they managed to detect the anomalies before they appeared. I had been curious about that for a while. We don't, Nazar admitted. We just have a rough idea of where they might show up. Usually in Moscow, it's in shopping malls, narrow streets, or under bridges. They like to appear in those places, but it's always different. You can never predict it for sure, although some of our guys seem to have a knack for it. Even I don't get how they do it, he chuckled. You must be hungry, he said, changing the subject to the one I dreaded the most. No, I'm not, I replied with a forced smile. Come on, don't be shy. Tamara's going to cook something real nice. He called out to an old woman as frightening as a nuclear war. Yeah, I'll whip something up, she grumbled. So, once again, I had to eat human flesh. To be honest, it wasn't as revolting as the first time. They had some basic spices here, and I just pretended I was eating pork or beef. Their trust in me grew quickly when they were convinced I was one of them. We sat at the table for a while talking. Nazar told me about the guy in the cage, saying he was a soldier who had survived the invasion at a military checkpoint. We talked about other soldiers in the government. He told me there wasn't really a government anymore, or if there was, they were hiding somewhere in a bunker. Either way, there was nothing left to govern. The military was around at first, but most of them either died from the Black Plague or deserted. After all, soldiers are still human. Just because they had rifles and body armor didn't make them invincible. They still had basic human instincts. We chatted until Nazar and the others started to yawn. I was barely holding on myself. I hadn't slept in ages, but I couldn't let my guard down here. Within minutes, the group began to head off to their sleeping quarters. Nazar wished me good night and went with them, inviting me to follow. I'll be there soon, I lied. Just need to use the bathroom first. Of course, there was no bathroom trip. I slipped outside, quickly scouting the area. It was strange that they didn't post any guards or anything. Were they really that confident? Or maybe no one ever dared to come here, knowing what would happen to them if they did. I wouldn't have come either, but here I was, and I needed to figure out how to escape this nightmare. They had a car. I had my eye on it. Sure, I didn't know how to drive, had never even tried. But I had seen others do it. Hopefully I could manage. On the other hand, all the cannibals were peacefully snoring away inside that cursed warehouse. Nothing was stopping me from grabbing a knife and making sure they never woke up. The world is cruel, and only the strong survive. A surprisingly quiet night was interrupted by the irritating creak of a metal gate behind me. I turned around, rubbing my eyes. Nazar came up to me and placed his cold, creepy hand on my shoulder. "Why aren't you lying down?" he asked, almost like a caring wife seeing her troubled husband in the middle of the night. Yeah, that's quite a comparison. "I don't know why, but I can't sleep," I mumbled. I knew I was about to collapse from sheer exhaustion. "You're lying to me, I can tell," he said. "When was the last time you slept? Tell me." "I don't even remember." "Or is something bothering you? Come on, don't hold back, tell me." "What is there to say?" I muttered. "Well, something is definitely on your mind. I just want to know what. We're all in this together. No secrets here in our little big family," he said. "Everything's fine, really. I'll just stand here for a bit, get some air, and head inside." "Yeah, the night's unusually quiet. Weird, isn't it?" I noted. "Yeah," he rasped. "But it's not rare around here. Though sometimes those creatures start howling nearby, making you jump out of bed. But that's rare." "Hey, Nazar," I began, looking at the man. "How did you all end up like this?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, how did you guys start eating people?" "Ah, Igor, how can I explain it to you?" "Just say it like it is. You said yourself there shouldn't be any secrets." "Ah, you caught me there," he said with a nasty grin. "We're all living creatures, right? We all need food to keep the machine running. When that black curse hovered over Moscow, it took my family first. I was lucky. I was at work that night when the black stuff surrounded our house. I still remember that. That circled around our poor 5-story building. To give you an idea, I never even went home. I couldn't. If I had seen my family dead, I would have stayed with them, locked in that apartment. But I chose a different path, and I've regretted it 1,000 times since. Why? You know why," he continued. "Why ask stupid questions? Look at what I've become. I eat people with these very hands and can't stop. Why am I even telling you this? You're just like me. When this nightmare started, there was plenty to go around, especially here in Moscow, where chaos and anarchy ruled. Cops and soldiers couldn't keep order, mainly because they were just people like us, flesh, blood, bones. They were more concerned with saving their own skins and families than keeping peace on the streets. No one was paying them anymore, and there was nothing to spend money on. People cleaned out supermarkets, markets, even small kiosks. It all went fast, and some even killed each other over a loaf of bread, even though in those first few months there was plenty for everyone. Lots of people disappeared when another market got swallowed by the black fog, but many survived, hiding their stolen goods in their apartments. I'm not just talking about food, clothes, TVs, computers. Then something happened, either an electromagnetic pulse or some other anomaly, and the lights went out. All the stolen tech instantly became worthless junk. I remember that pulse, I thought to myself. I remember how we were driving, and in a flash there was this jolt, and the dashboard went dark. Yeah, anyone who was still alive saw and felt it, he added. Soon, when the stores were empty, people started grouping up, armed themselves, banded together to terrorize those who had hoarded the most. Every day, food became scarcer and scarcer. I hope you understand what I'm getting at, brother. Yeah, I get it, I thought, nodding silently. Food ran out, production stopped, time passed, and people started eating each other because there was nothing left. Not even animals. I had to follow suit too because I love life too much and want to see the day when all of this ends. When the sky clears, the sun shines again, and people come out of their holes and breathe freely anywhere on this planet. I hope I live to see that day. His words gave me chills. They were sincere, and strangely, I understood him. What happened next? I asked. How did you end up banding together with others? Yeah, it kind of just happened. There were 3 of us at first, me and 2 other guys. They're the ones who brought you here. We worked together before all this. We decided to set up here. People saw that we were doing fine, living, staying warm, and most importantly, safe. They started coming to us, but they only learned the truth once they got here. Many stayed with us despite everything, but for others it was too much and, well, let's just say they didn't last long. Don't get me wrong, Igor. I'm not some sicko who enjoys all the horrors I've done. I just want to live. Have you ever thought about leaving this place? I asked. Leaving the city? Yeah, I have. And believe me, there's nothing out there anymore. There was at first, but now it's just a wasteland with nothing alive, except maybe those creatures. After hearing his story, the thought of killing them all faded from my mind. But I wasn't staying either. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know. Hey, Nazar, I started again. Yeah. He pulled out a rolled cigarette from an old rusty canister. That soldier in the cage, where'd you get him from? Maybe he knows something valuable. If he knew something, he would have spilled it by now. He drove by a couple of days ago in that wreck over there, he said, pointing to the broken-down car. Said he was looking for his people, probably soldiers. You don't come across people like that much anymore. Well, I wouldn't tell you guys anything either if it meant staying in that cage, I said with a smile. Maybe he does know something. We just need to figure out how to get it out of him. Oh, we've already tried. The guy's tight-lipped, says he doesn't know anything or understand what's going on. And you don't feel bad about keeping him locked up like that? Wouldn't it be better to just kill him? Of course we feel bad, but if we kill him now, all that meat goes to waste. One person lasts us a long time. And how do you get along with all these people? Does it really work? Oh, come on. The people here are just as messed up. Sometimes I'm even scared to fall asleep myself. All right, we've been talking too long. Let's go inside. It's getting colder. Nazar yawned, heading towards the rusty door. You ever think about trying again? Finding a better life outside the city? I have this gut feeling, he said, that somewhere out there, there's still a place untouched by this plague. I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes for a brief second, but it faded just as quickly. Yeah, I've thought about it. Leaving all these people behind and setting off on my own, but something always held me back. And there's an unspoken rule here. If you come here, eat here, then you stay here. That goes for me and everyone else, including you now. Then why did you offer me a choice? Out of politeness. I knew you'd stay. Let's go. We've been talking too long, he repeated, tossing his cigarette butt to the ground and heading for the door. I followed him, all the while thinking about how to convince him to escape with me. But what could I even say? I didn't even know where to run to myself. And another question gnawed at me. Could I trust this guy? He told me his story, but what's stopping him from sticking a knife in my back the moment he gets hungry? I needed to think. I decided to stay the night. We went inside. Nazar lay down on his bed, covering himself with a dirty, torn blanket. I settled down nearby. The gentle crackling of the fire in the barrels lulled me a bit. The fires burned 24/7, casting a dim light across the large room. I shut my tired eyes and instantly drifted into the world of dreams. In my dream, I found myself in a strange place. It was bright with lush green grass and fresh air. I was lying in a meadow surrounded by a wall of tall pine trees. I could hear birds singing. I couldn't even remember the last time I heard birds, probably back in my childhood. The most interesting part was that I knew I was dreaming. I remembered everything I had gone through and where I really was. Suddenly the sky above me turned black, and giant, terrifying silhouettes appeared among the trees. They were ripping the trees from their roots, and the ground shook beneath me with each step they took. But I remained lying in the meadow, unable to move, just watching everything. At some point, I felt something approaching. I looked to my right and saw a dark, skinny, shambling creature coming toward me. It walked right up to me and placed its disgusting hand on my chest, and then, as if someone snapped their fingers, everything disappeared, like the tape of a film being rewound. I woke up in a cold sweat. I looked around. The firewood in the barrels was still crackling. The poor guy in the cage was still snoring, leaning against the damp wall, and everyone else was deep in their 10th dream. I got up from my makeshift bed and quietly walked over to the table to drink some water. As soon as I opened the bottle, I heard a whisper from the dark. At first, I thought I was still half asleep, imagining it, but then it came again. Hey, Igor, come here. Someone was calling me, but with a couple dozen people here, I couldn't tell who it was. I'm in the cage, Igor. Then it hit me. I quietly approached the caged man, who, it turned out, wasn't asleep after all. Listen, he whispered. I can see you're not like them. I can see it on your face. You're different. He was hissing, trying to keep his voice down. Get me out of here, please. I know a place where we can get help. Let's run away together. You're not like them. You're a normal person. And what makes you think I'm normal? Trust me, I've been here for days. I've seen things. I saw you eating that meat. They were devouring it like it was a feast, but you could barely choke it down. You were disgusted. I saw it. What is this place you know of? Who's going to help us? Where is it? I was heading there when those stopped me and locked me up. His voice cut off as we heard shuffling from the sleeping area. He pointed to a nail driven into the wall nearby. Free me. I know where to go. I know how to survive. And trust me, soon, there won't be anything left here. What do you mean? I'll tell you everything. Just let me out. All right, give me a second, I said as I stood up and looked around, hoping everyone was still asleep. I grabbed the key from the nail, inserted it into the lock, and finally opened the cage. The poor guy could barely stand. He was so weak. They've got a car outside, I whispered. It's the one I came in. We quietly headed for the exit. Just as we reached the door, the old hag who usually cooked dinner suddenly woke up, as if she sensed that something was wrong. She got up from her bed, saw us sneaking toward the door, and let out a loud scream that woke up the entire warehouse, even the dogs. In those seconds, I regretted 100 times over trusting that ex-soldier. The sleeping cannibals, all 15 of them, jumped up from their spots, including Nazar. There was no way we could take them all on. Even lifting our hands to fight was out of the question. The soldier grabbed a metal rod and started swinging it in all directions, keeping the cannibals from getting too close. I picked up a homemade stool and smashed it over the head of one of them who had gotten too close. I cracked his skull open and the guy fell to the floor, bleeding out. I didn't even realize how it happened, but the sight of it sent the rest of the crowd into a frenzy. They started rushing us one after another. We managed to take down a few of them, but eventually they overwhelmed us, and we were pinned down by the thugs who had dragged out someone's body from behind the curtain just the day before. Then the shrieking old woman came over, holding a large blood-stained knife. She smiled, revealing her rotten teeth. "Hold them tighter," she hissed at the thugs, and they squeezed us even harder. I couldn't move, but something strange happened then. Nazar was nowhere to be seen among the crowd, nor was he lying on his bed. His appearance was so distinct that I couldn't have missed him, but soon enough Nazar made his presence known. The old woman was about to slaughter us like cattle, and the crowd was eagerly waiting for it. But just then, Nazar appeared from the crowd, walked up to the old woman, and pulled a small knife from his pocket. In one swift motion, he slit her throat from ear to chin, spraying blood all over us. The grip of the thugs holding us loosened immediately. Everyone in the room was, to say the least, in shock. All the cannibals stood frozen, staring at Nazar. He quickly grabbed a nearby rifle and pointed it at the goons. "Let them go, now, or you'll join her." They exchanged glances, realizing Nazar had just broken their rules, making him no better than us. But in his hands he had a powerful argument, the rifle with enough rounds to send everyone to the afterlife. "I said, let them go! Are you deaf?" he barked, waving the rifle in their faces. Their grip loosened, and we quickly scrambled to our feet, backing toward the door. Nazar never took his eyes off the crowd as we moved. Out, quick, stay close behind me," Nazar ordered. He led us out, keeping the cannibals at bay. Some of them had already drawn knives and were slowly following us. We rushed to the car. "Military guy, you're driving," Nazar said. The cannibals didn't last long. It seemed to dawn on them what was happening, and they charged at us, screaming like banshees. Gunshots rang out. 1, 2, 3. "Faster, faster!" I yelled as we scrambled into the car. The soldier took the wheel, I jumped in the front, and Nazar hopped in the back. The enraged mob attacked the car, smashing the windows, trying to hack through the roof with knives and axes. But Nazar kept firing, picking them off one by one. Finally, the car jolted forward. The cannibals ran after us for a while, but we quickly left them in the dust, and soon the cursed warehouse disappeared from view. We sped along the empty roads of Moscow in silence. Nazar checked his rifle. The soldier, whose name was Misha, kept his eyes glued to the road. I leaned back in my seat, staring at the tattered ceiling. "What made you decide to help us?" Misha broke the silence, directing the question at Nazar. "A couple of days ago, you were telling me how you'd cook me for dinner. What changed?" Nazar stayed silent. Misha kept glaring at him through the rearview mirror, clearly itching for a fight. "Now's not the time to hash this out," I muttered, though Misha was on edge. Given the chance, he'd probably take Nazar's head off. I could understand Misha's anger, but I also understood Nazar. "Look, he saved us. Whatever he did before is in the past. If it weren't for him taking on a dozen crazed cannibals, we'd already be lying on that butcher's table right now. Forget the past. We need to move forward. It'll be easier together," I said. "Yeah, right," Misha smirked. "Watch your back. You might wake up one day missing a chunk of flesh." "Everything's going to be fine," Nazar suddenly chimed in. "I'm not like them." "Yeah, sure. I totally believe you," Misha sneered. "Enough," I shouted, and Misha shut up instantly. "Tell us where we're going and why. And what is this place you mentioned?" I asked. "We're heading to Murmansk," Misha answered, pulling out a map from the glove compartment. "Specifically, here." He pointed to a spot near the coast. "And what's there?" I asked. "I heard whispers," Misha replied. "Something about an anomaly, an abnormal cold. It's not like it used to be. I'm not sure what caused it, but those creatures don't do well in the cold. They die like flies." "Interesting," Nazar muttered. "It's winter here too, but they're not dying. In fact, they seem more alive than ever." "Well, I'm hoping to find something there," Misha said. "Like what?" I asked. "Well, I'm not sure. It's been 10 years, but there was a base there. During peacetime, they had nuclear submarines." "Oh, come on," I laughed. "You think those subs are still sitting there waiting for you after 10 years? They've probably rusted away or sunk." "Maybe," Misha replied, "but it's still safer there than here." "And what will you eat there, genius?" "Snow?" Nazar retorted. "I'd rather eat snow than people, you bastard," Misha snapped back. "All right, calm down, you two," I intervened. "We're in this together now. Let's just move forward. How far is it? I asked. It's far, but we don't have any better options, Misha replied. Then we need to stock up on warm clothes, I smiled. Are you guys serious? Murmansk? Nazar suddenly panicked. What about gas? What about food? We'll catch something just for you, Misha joked. If you throw another stone at me, I'll slit your throat and eat you in your sleep, Nazar threatened. Yeah, calm down. Don't eat me, big bad wolf, Misha mocked. Let's go. Don't tempt fate, Nazar chuckled, holding back laughter. Misha turned the key, and we hit the road again, occasionally stopping to raid houses for warm clothing. I had a feeling we'd need it soon. Outside, the creatures were going wild in their black nests. We barely managed to avoid them. Leaving Moscow was tougher than expected. The streets were filled with those many-armed monsters and countless, shambling, humanoid horrors. They clung to the car, grabbing the doors and handles with a death grip that was almost impossible to break. But Nazar's aim was sharp. He picked them off with the rifle, having grabbed several boxes of ammo from the cannibals' hideout. It took us 2 days to get out of Moscow. Sometimes we stopped to rest, hiding the car and finding shelter in nearby basements or cellars, which were the safest spots. Last night I noticed how, not long ago, bitter enemies were now sitting around a small fire, laughing and sharing their life stories, roasting surprisingly fresh mushrooms we had found in one of the cellars. The road ahead was long, and we needed to rest and gather our strength. Tomorrow, we would finally leave this cursed city behind and set off in search of a new, better life. I just hope everything works out. I could never have imagined that the road to Murmansk would be so long and difficult. And no, it wasn't just about those creatures that were everywhere. Though honestly, who am I kidding? They were a huge problem too. But hunger, that was the real torture. Nazar was right when he told me that there was nothing to be gained outside of the capital. Empty roads, abandoned villages and settlements. There was nothing left. Everything was covered in dust, darkness, and cobwebs. I still couldn't figure out where all the cobwebs were coming from. It was all we found during our endless attempts to keep from starving. Even though Misha and Nazar seemed to be getting along, Misha was still a bit scared of him. Every time he went to sleep, he would keep a knife by his side. Nazar, though, only managed to hold on to his sanity for about 2 days. Then, I started to notice how his condition was changing, both emotionally and physically. He began to remind me more of a drug addict than a normal, healthy person. But instead of drugs, his addiction was for human flesh. Still, he managed to keep it together and hold on as long as he could. When we left the city, we were all in high spirits, thrilled to finally escape that cursed place. We were heading towards something good, something hopeful, and none of us cared that we had no supplies. We just didn't want to think about it. We didn't want to darken the joy that filled us, but things turned out far worse than I had imagined. We kept driving, exhausted, starving, freezing, heading north. Nazar was passed out in the back seat, and I was also dozing off. It was already getting late when Misha's anxious voice jolted me from my slumber. "We're running out of gas. We're not going to make it." He groaned. I rubbed my eyes and looked at the dashboard. The fuel gauge was on empty. I wasn't surprised. We'd been refueling along the way, whenever we managed to find even a drop of gas, but what was happening now was inevitable. Soon the car began to sputter. Misha kept trying to restart it to get it to move even a few more meters, but it was no use. We all knew we were done. "There it is," sighed Misha, resting his forehead on the steering wheel. "We're here," I echoed. After my words, a groggy voice from the back seat broke the silence. "What happened? Why did we stop? We're out of gas." "What do you mean, out of gas?" Nazar asked, still not fully grasping the situation. Out of gas, as in none left, Misha replied irritably. And why are you yelling at me? How was I supposed to know? All right, calm down, both of you. We need to think about what to do next, I said, trying to, de-escalate the tension. Oh yeah, sure. Got any bright ideas? Misha snapped. First of all, get your head together and use your brain, I retorted. Yeah, listen to him, Nazar chimed in, poking Misha with his finger. This was bound to happen sooner or later. I just thought we'd be in a village when it did, where maybe we could find another car or some gas. Misha huffed, annoyed. Well, you guys are lousy mathematicians. He started gathering his things. And where do you think you're going? Gonna walk? Nazar asked. No, but we could sit here and wait. Maybe some monster will pick us up and carry us on its back, Misha replied sarcastically. He's right, I said. We need to pack up and keep moving on foot along the road, but we should stick to the woods where we won't be as exposed. So that's what we did. Nazar grabbed his rifle and a bag, and we left the car behind. The road was flanked by bare trees, and the ground was still wet from a recent rain. The scene reminded me of when, as a child, my mother and I fled the city after my father died. We had been running from the sect that had taken over, and then Uncle Union, God rest his soul, showed up like an angel, rescuing us on his old train. Maybe we'll get lucky again, I thought to myself, but I doubt it. That was just a coincidence. There are no guardian angels, not now. We kept trudging through the forest, the wet ground sticking to our boots. We didn't stop until we found a small pond, not far from the road. I almost fell into it because I couldn't see the edge in the dark. That night we found a few mussels and a small fish washed up on the shore. We cleaned our finds thoroughly, filled our water bottles, and returned to the fallen tree where we'd set up camp. After eating a meager meal, we covered ourselves with the blankets we'd found in one of the Moscow apartments, leaving Misha to stand guard. I was so exhausted that I didn't dream at all. My brain had completely shut down. Occasionally, we'd hear the distant, eerie wails of those creatures, but I paid them no mind. Suddenly, Misha shook me awake. Guys, wake up. I think I'm losing it. I'm seeing things. What? I groaned, rubbing my eyes. He pointed toward the road. I strained to see what he was pointing at, and then I saw it. Movement. Something definitely not human was moving toward us. And then came the howl. It was deep, guttural, and close. In the distance, about 100 meters away, a black cloud was growing, and within it, something massive, something so large that the cloud couldn't conceal it completely. Its silhouette was visible even in the pitch darkness. Quick, pack up, we need to get out of here, whispered Nazar, shoving the still warm blankets into his bag. Hurry, hurry. In our overconfidence, we'd failed to douse the campfire. That must have drawn the creature to us. We hurriedly gathered our things and moved farther into the forest, hoping we wouldn't be seen. But it was too late. Within moments, we heard the creature's heavy, thunderous footsteps approaching, shaking the ground beneath us. We sped up, but soon trees started crashing down behind us, and the terrifying roars became deafening. It was chasing us, something massive. We didn't dare look back. All I could think about was a similar moment from my childhood when we'd encountered something like this in an abandoned village. It ripped trees from the ground and hurled them at us, but by some miracle none of them hit us back then, and none did now. We ran until we reached another body of water, this one larger. It was so dark that we couldn't see a thing, and we tumbled down a small embankment toward the water. There we hid. It was eerily similar to that scene from The Lord of the Rings, when the hobbits hid from the Black Rider. But this wasn't a movie, and this wasn't a Black Rider. This thing, this shadow, stood by the water, about 50 meters from us. It was massive, around 4 meters tall, with an enormous head, impossibly long arms and legs, and its skin, if you could call it that, was oozing some kind of black substance. It wasn't just a shadow, it was a living nightmare. We stayed completely still, barely breathing, knowing that running would be useless. We were out in the open, easy prey if it decided to come for us. All we could do was pray. Then, as if sensing us, it suddenly turned toward us, and the black cloud around it began to grow rapidly. "Run!" shouted Nazar, and we bolted, running along the water's edge, hoping to circle around it. We plunged into the icy water. The cold was so intense it felt like it was burning my skin, but the creature didn't follow us. It just stood there on the shore, watching. And then, without a sound, it turned and disappeared into the trees. We swam to the opposite shore, and Nazar and Misha had to help me. I was never a good swimmer. We were soaked to the bone, and it wasn't exactly summer out here. The cold was brutal, and Misha, shivering, muttered, "We have to keep moving, or we'll freeze to death." We stumbled along through the night, and by morning we finally reached a road. We lit a fire to dry our clothes a bit, but we knew we couldn't stop for long. There were still too many of those creatures lurking. I was beginning to think that maybe there weren't any people left at all, just these things. No matter how remote or desolate a place seemed, we'd always run into them. Or maybe they were tracking us somehow. I couldn't tell, but it sure felt that way. Over the next few days, we passed through a couple of villages, but they were completely empty. We found next to nothing to eat, so we relied on mushrooms from the forest. It wasn't much, but it was something. One time Misha ate too many mushrooms and it messed him up bad. He had to run to the bushes every half hour. That happened when we stopped in what used to be a village. It wasn't much, just 3 houses, standing somewhat intact while the rest had collapsed long ago. And of course we saw that black shadow again, but this time it didn't notice us. One night I woke up because the ground was trembling beneath me. I looked out of the broken window and saw one of the creature's enormous legs just barely miss the house. It moved on, and behind it, like children following a parent, smaller monsters trailed behind. They must have been what was left of the local population. You could still make out human features in their twisted forms. Not many of them, though. Once they were out of sight, I woke Misha and Nazar, and we quickly packed up and left. We weren't about to test our luck. We made a point of not staying in one place too long after that. We bypassed villages, settlements, even small towns, because from a distance you could see that something terrible was happening in those places. There were black plumes rising into the sky, but they weren't from fires, just thick columns of that same dark, malevolent substance. There were no people there, none. The further north we went, the colder it got. Those ragged clothes we had scavenged back in Moscow came in handy. Eventually, snow began to fall. It came down thick and heavy, but only for a short while. As soon as it touched the ground, it melted. That day, luck smiled on us for the last time. We arrived at another small village and began searching it for anything useful. Misha went off to check the garage, and soon we heard him shouting excitedly. We ran over, confused, and found Misha hugging and kissing the hood of a beat-up old Lada. "Has he completely lost it?" Nazar muttered under his breath. "What the hell's wrong with you?" I asked, half joking. Misha beamed. "You're not going to believe this. This car runs on wood." "First time I've ever heard of that," I said, skeptical. But Misha wasn't kidding. Attached to the back of the car were pipes and some sort of tank, and Misha explained that it was a wood-powered car. In the garage, we also found a small stash of wine in a barrel. That day was unforgettable. We spent it fixing up the car, figuring out how it worked, and pumping up the tires by hand. After all that, we celebrated. It was the first time I'd ever gotten drunk, and probably the last. Everything I drank ended up on the floor later that night. The next day, we were back on the road, slowly making our way north in the Lada. It wasn't fast or comfortable, but there was no shortage of wood to keep it running. Misha had been right back when we were in that cannibal's den. The colder it got, the fewer creatures we encountered. We kept driving without stopping, taking turns behind the wheel, though they let me drive as little as possible. Eventually, we came to a massive bay. The view from the window was breathtakingly beautiful, but also terrifying in its coldness. I felt chills run through my already emaciated body. We had no food left, and I mentioned earlier how luck had smiled on us for the last time. There was nothing here but snow. We even tried fishing, but the fish weren't biting, not even on a red thread from a sock. We were exhausted, angry, and freezing. The only comfort was that we didn't run into many creatures. But I wasn't just worried about our empty stomachs. Something else gnawed at me. What if we reached our destination and there was nothing there? No people, no safety, nothing. What would we do then? I didn't know. I could only hope that Misha had some plan, that he knew what he was doing. We had covered most of the journey by then, and I still don't know how we managed it. But we couldn't relax yet. There was one last push to make. After that, we'd either hit the jackpot or die. There were no other options. Unless, of course, we starved to death before we got there. Weakness was overtaking us all. I was constantly tired, always wanting to sleep. We had to stop often. One time, we stopped on the outskirts of a small village to chop wood and refuel the car. It was getting dark and a storm had started, so we decided to stay the night. We found a house that was relatively intact. Nazar wasn't doing well at all. He barely spoke. Misha and I, being younger and healthier, were holding up, but it was obvious Nazar was struggling. That night he snapped. We had just gone to bed. I was on guard duty as usual, but exhaustion got the better of me and I fell asleep. I woke to the sound of a terrible crash and shouting. I thought the creatures had come for us again. I ran to the others and found Nazar on top of Misha, strangling him. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed Nazar and pulled him off. He suddenly realized what he was doing and collapsed onto the bed, sobbing. I told you this bastard was just waiting for the right moment. Misha gasped, clutching his throat. The damn cannibal. I didn't mean to, Nazar sobbed. I lost control. Please forgive me. I didn't want to do it. What the hell are you talking about? I asked. He attacked me while I was asleep, and you, falling asleep on watch. Nice job. Misha yelled at me like we were a couple of misbehaving kids. I couldn't blame him. He had just narrowly escaped death. I don't know how we're going to continue from here, Misha said, rubbing his bruised neck. I trusted him, but now I don't know anymore. I've changed, Misha. I really have, Nazar pleaded, but Misha wasn't having it. Oh yeah? You nearly strangled me. And then what? You'd move on to him next, huh? Misha shot a glance at me. And after that, what? A feast, huh? You could have killed me, and then what would we have done? Igor. Misha turned to me. You have to make a choice. It's me or him. I want to live, and if I'm going to die, I'd rather starve than end up as dinner. Nazar broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably. He knew if we left him, he wouldn't last long on his own. I felt sorry for him, but at the same time I understood the risk. If he snapped again, we might not be so lucky. But then again, he had saved us before. Why would he leave his relatively safe and comfortable life back at the warehouse if he was just some heartless cannibal? It didn't add up. I decided to defend him. Misha, we don't know what he's going through. He slipped, but we don't know the toll this is taking on him. We don't know how far he's been pushed, I argued. Sure, but I'm starving too, and I'm not trying to kill anyone, especially not my own people, Misha snapped back. I'm telling you, if we keep going with him, it's only a matter of time before we end up in his stomach. I'm not taking that risk, he said. Goodbye. He stormed out of the house, leaving me alone with the still crying Nazar. I knew Misha was serious. He wasn't coming back. I rushed out after him. Wait, what are you doing? You can't just leave like this, I shouted. Why not? Misha barked. You think I want to stick around and get eaten? You're overreacting, I said. We've come this far. You can't just throw it all away now. We've been through too much. I understand how you feel, but don't make this worse than it is. I tried to reason. You understand? I'd like to see you keep your cool if someone tried to strangle you in your sleep. Misha snapped. I was torn. I knew Nazar didn't mean to hurt Misha, but I also understood why Misha was so scared. He had every right to be. This was a nightmare scenario, and it was hard to think straight. But Misha was being reckless, too sure of himself, thinking he could decide everything. Nazar stepped outside, overhearing the conversation. He was angrier than I'd ever seen him before. Misha had clearly struck a nerve. I turned my attention back to Misha, and in that moment I heard the unmistakable sound of a rifle being cocked. Nazar, wait! I shouted, but it was too late. The gunshot echoed through the cold, empty wilderness. It was deafening. The bullet tore through the windshield and hit Misha square in the head. Blood trickled from a small hole in his forehead, and the back of his skull was blown apart. I stood there, frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Only yesterday we were in the car, laughing, talking about the future. And now this. What have you done? I screamed at Nazar. I can explain, he said, lowering the rifle. He walked over to the car, pulled Misha's body out, and tossed it into the snow. I wasn't going to eat him. That wasn't my plan. What? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Misha knew where we were going. He was a soldier. He knew there were people in Murmansk, and he was leading us there. But we weren't going to be welcomed. He was going to present us as cannibals, with all that implies. I've been watching him for a long time. I even read his journal. Nazar reached into Misha's jacket and pulled out a small, crumpled notebook. Here, look, he said. I only needed to read a few lines to realize Misha had been using us. He planned to get us to Murmansk, but only so he could throw us under the bus to save himself. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked, still in shock. I didn't know how to break it to you. I wasn't going to eat him. I just needed to kill him and leave him here, Nazar said, his voice trembling slightly. We couldn't let him take us there. They don't tolerate cannibals, looters, or any of that. And that's exactly how he was going to frame us. A shiver ran down my spine as I realized that everything had changed in just a few minutes. From Misha's journal, it was clear that Murmansk was still home to a large number of people, a functioning society with its own laws and order, but they wouldn't have taken kindly to us. Nazar reminded me that he had promised to stop eating human flesh, and he had kept that promise. We did our best to clean up the blood, climbed into the car, and left that place. We reached Murmansk the next day. Smoke rose from chimneys, fires burned in barrels, and most importantly, there were people, lots of them. Makeshift shelters were scattered all over, and children played in the streets. The sight was overwhelming. I couldn't hold back my emotions and let out a loud shout, while Nazar just smiled softly, glancing at me and then back at the road. Murmansk had its own peaceful atmosphere. There was no looting, no cannibalism, nothing like that. There was plenty of food. Fishermen caught fish and other seafood in abundance. People grew vegetables in basements, and they even raised chickens and pigs. The cold had protected this place, preventing that black plague from infecting the land and sea. It wasn't easy at first, but they helped new arrivals, offering food, warm clothes, and even jobs. Nazar and I were no exception. We became part of this large, still functioning community. In this snowy place, we found a new home, a place where we could breathe freely, where we didn't have to listen to those blood-curdling screams or eat rotten scraps, or worse, human flesh. We finally found what we had been searching for all this time. Maybe it was our reward for everything we had been through. I won't write anymore. There's plenty to do here, and besides, this notebook is almost full. The end.
If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Together we can take this channel to the next level, and don't forget to check out this video.